Welcome to the Pages of Hackney podcast. This event was recorded at the B6 College Hackney on the 20th of March 2023. We welcomed the Cradle community to discuss their book Brick by Brick, How We Build a World Without Prisons, and Gracie Bradley and Luke de Noronha, authors of Against Borders, The Case for Abolition. Cradle community is an abolitionist collective and transformative justice experiment. They're a group of facilitators, organisers, artists and scholars committed to growing transformative justice responses to state and interpersonal violence through creating spaces for learning and creativity. In 2021, their book Brick by Brick, How We Build a World Without Prisons was published by Hajar Press. Representing Cradle community this evening are Kelsey and Chelsea. Gracie Bradley is a writer and campaigner. She has several years' experience working at the grassroots, including as part of the Against Borders for Children and Black Abolitionist Futures reading group. Gracie has written extensively for a range of publications, including The Guardian, Independent, Vice, Open Democracy, and more. Other writings include From Grenfell to Windrush in After Grenfell, Violence, Resistance and Response, published by Pluto Press in 2019, and the poem Unlawful Gathering in When This Is Over, Reflections on an Unequal Pandemic, published this month by Policy Press. Luke de Noronha is an academic and writer working at the Sarah Parker Remond Centre at UCL. His first book, Deporting Black Britons, Portraits of Deportation to Jamaica, was published by Manchester University Press in 2020, and he was one of the co-authors of Empire's Endgame, Racism and the British State, published by Pluto Press in 2021. He's also produced Deportation Discs, a podcast created with deported people in Jamaica. Gracie and Luke co-authored the book Against Borders, The Case for Abolition, which was published last year by Verso.
I'm Chelsea. This is Kelsey. We're from Cradle. Everyone in the collective's names don't rhyme, unfortunately. Unfortunately. So we want to start with, we have pulled out 4 passages from Brick by Brick, that we want to read, and so we'll kind of alternate with those. Brick by Brick is based on conversations we've had within the abolitionist movement. In the following work, we outline the bricks that need to be torn down in order to transform the conditions under which we live for the better. First, we demonstrate how ideas of criminality and punishment affect and are ingrained into many aspects of our lives, from our historical context to the food we eat, to the entertainment we consume, to the gender binary, to the state's provision of housing, education, and care. Each of these sites of oppression and punishment is also a site of resistance. The second section of the book is a vision for what an abolitionist approach could look like, highlighting the radically inclusive and collaborative systems we are assembling to build a safer world. Abolition asks for more than just the demolition of buildings. It asks for the complete dismantling of the world as we know it and the building of a whole new one, which will offer such an abundance of care that there will be no space in our minds, let alone in our communities, for things like prisons. This work is an experiment in connecting the dots, an exploration of how we can honor centuries of resistance and respond to the new challenges of our generation. We reject the myth that imprisonment, surveillance, and control keep us safe or solve social and economic problems. Abolition is the work of creating a world full of love, health, education, food, shared abundance, dignity, safety, justice, and freedom. To realize this world, we must tear down, transform, and rebuild the very bricks of our lives.
Crime is a distraction. The framing of public safety as a battle between good cops and bad criminals masks the harms enforced and perpetuated by the state. Keeping anyone in a cage is a violent response to violence, and while prisons are disguised as being necessary for public safety, they themselves are inherently unsafe. We can thus see that not everything that hurts us is classed as a crime, while not everything that is a crime causes harm to people. We also know that people who have access to power and money do not live under the same laws as people who don't. Sex work, drug possession, and not paying your TV license are all crimes worthy of state punishment. Yet the deaths of 72 people in the Grenfell Tower fire, state-sanctioned killing during war, healthcare cuts, preventable deaths in care homes from COVID-19, and evictions of people from their homes are not deemed criminal. This reveals the truth that criminal law is designed not to keep us safe and prevent harm, but rather to control and punish those made vulnerable by the state through poverty, addiction, homelessness, illness, xenophobia, patriarchy, racism, queerphobia, transphobia, and ableism. Our government does not tackle the social isolation and conditions of deprivation that lead to further harm. Instead, it cracks down on those it labels as criminals. Crime is a construct that changes depending on its targets, applied to some, but never to others.
But what about the rapists and the murderers? Contrary to how abolition may be portrayed in the press, prioritizing the safety of children, women, trans people, and gender nonconforming people is at the center of everything we do. We are sick of rape and violence being treated as an inevitable part of the human experience. We reject the idea that the root cause of these harms is the existence of innately bad people, i.e., rapists and murderers, in our society, as well as the myth that the criminal justice system and prison industrial complex protect people from sexual violence and murder. In fact, people die every year in state custody. Invasive body searches are commonplace, and coercion and violence run rampant. In a safe society, state officials should not be able to sexually assault you for a paycheck inside or outside prison walls. Prison doesn't do anything to prevent rape or murder, and the police are useless at intervening in instances of stalking and domestic abuse. Hundreds of accusations of domestic abuse are made against police officers themselves every year. Meanwhile, many members of the public, such as sex workers and undocumented people, are unable to report the violence they're subjected to at the hands of the police. But this violence nonetheless exists.
A world without prisons is nothing like the world we live in now. It is a world built on collective safety and care for all of us. To build such a world, it is essential that we abolish the prison system and every structure that serves to deprive us of our freedom, safety, and dignity. The global prison abolitionist movement resists all forms of violence and oppression, inviting us to work to transform our relationships with each other and the earth. Thank you, everyone, for coming along tonight. We wanted to start off as well with a little bit of an intro as to how we came to abolition ourselves. So I think I'll start with that. So for me, I came into this organizing as a feminist organizer, as a survivor, as someone who has never been able to rely on the police for my safety or the safety of people in my community. And when I came into feminist organizing, I joined an organization called Sisters Uncut, which some of you might have heard of, who focused primarily on domestic violence services and the cuts to them under austerity. But as the politics of Sisters Uncut grew, and when I joined, I was part of the North London chapter, which focused around the Holloway prison, which some of you might be familiar with. It was the biggest women's prison in Western Europe. It closed in 2016. And since then, there's been a local campaign to transform that site into a site of social housing and to build a building to serve the community with transformative justice principles, a space to try and remedy the state violence that has happened historically on that site. And through getting involved in that campaign, I started to really understand the connections between the prison system and domestic violence on a much deeper level and on a systemic level, and seeing the way that actually so many of the same people who are going through the prison system are themselves victims and survivors of violence, are people who've been abused throughout their lives, and are people who are the same people who are seeking the same like domestic violence services, housing services, mental health services, all of these things, going through those same systems. And actually, as things get worse, it becomes actually so hard to access any kind of support within our communities that actually some people were only getting access to those kinds of things when they were in prison, once they were criminalized. And that all really brought home for me why we needed to start to dismantle the prison system itself as a place where all of these issues kind of come together. And so, started to get more involved in the Holloway campaign. We're still fighting that campaign. And also against like the expansion of the prison system across the UK, seeing that as really a really crucial point of if we're really going to see any investment or sort of building of community spaces of support, we have to intervene on the rapid rise of policing and criminalization, the new laws that are putting more and more of our people in prison, the new laws that are targeting migrants and other marginalized groups as well. And I won't go too far into all of that, but I guess just to say that was doing lots of this dismantling work, and I'm still doing that work, fighting those campaigns, and a lot of like fighting fires, supporting people in prison, trying to do that abolitionist work of regardless of who you are or what you've done, understanding that like we need to build solidarity with people inside, because you're not defined by just one single thing that you have done or what the state has defined you as. Whether that is by your crime or by your gender or anything else, your risk assessment, any of that. But we needed to do that building work as well. We needed to do something that was hopeful. And so started to use those skills that I developed as a facilitator and as someone who has been involved in a lot of conflict and has often found myself sort of supporting people who kind of falling into that mediator role in a sort of natural way and being like, actually, what are the skills that we need in order to live in a world without prisons? And so Cradle community came out of those ideas of really needing a more hopeful space and needing a space to start to build the skills that we need in order so that when we think about how are we dealing with problems without calling the police, we actually have answers to that. We are building systems and practices and skills to do that. So that's when we started doing these bystander intervention workshops and de-escalation workshops and working with people who've been in, including other members of the collective who've been in psychiatric units and in prison and have been incarcerated in these ways to think about what are the interventions that we could have made earlier so that the state didn't have to get involved, right? So that we could have protected each other and start building those systems earlier. So that's kind of where Cradle came from. We didn't actually mean to write a book. We were doing loads of workshops and stuff, but then the pandemic happened and we were stuck at home, and our friends started a publishing press, and so we were like, maybe we can get these ideas out there in a different way. And so that's kind of how the book came about, and that's how Cradle came about, so yeah.
Unfortunately, I'm American.
How did you end up here?
Yeah, and I had to lead with that because it's like, who are you? What are you doing here? So I am in the UK because of Abolition. So I started off as a Black Lives Matter activist at the age of 17. Mike Brown was killed in 2014 in Ferguson, Missouri, and I was pissed off about it. Because he could have been my brother. He could have been my high school boyfriend. He could have been anyone that I knew. Because he was 17 years old. He was a high school graduate just like me. He was 2 weeks away from starting his first year in uni, just like I was. And he was laying dead in the street, and I wasn't. And so I went to my first protest that weekend. I got involved with Black Lives Matter Atlanta. And then I went to uni and I started to study African American studies and political science. So I started to actually study social justice and trying to understand, why does racism exist? Like, from an intellectual perspective, why does discrimination exist? Why does poverty exist? Why does sexism exist? So these were actually the questions I was studying in my academic degree. I'm a super nerd, so like, one master's degree later, I was having a conversation with my dad, and he asked me, I remember I was just telling him how frustrated I was, and I was like, I'm tired of fighting all the time. You know, it feels like you're always fighting like one system or another system or another system. And my dad asked me, what are you fighting for? You're always thinking about what you're fighting against, but what are you fighting for? And I was like, I'm against racism, so clearly I want racial equity. And he was like, those aren't the same thing. You're fighting against something. You're fighting against racism, but what are you fighting for? And I'm like, racial equity. We should live in a Star Trek world. Like, everyone should be treated the same, regardless of what their body is, where they were born, how old they are. Like, it shouldn't matter. It should be, what is your skills? What color is your soul? Like, what are you good at? That's what should drive our world. And my dad was like, okay, that's what you need to focus on. So in trying to find abolition, basically, I started in this intellectual exercise of, maybe if I understand everything that's wrong with the world, then we could just fix it. And then when I was doing that, I was getting hella depressed and disillusioned and like pissed off. And the more things I learned about the world, the more I was like, guys, should we just wipe it and start over? Like, I started speaking to the aliens, like, guys, come get me. Like, I'm over it. And that's when I had to make the switch to abolition. So I needed something to fight for. And all of my research kept coming back to me and saying, you can change the color of the police officer, it's not going to do anything. You can change that CEO into a woman, it's not going to do anything. So the more my research was showing me, you can't tinker around the edges, something has to change. That's when I was like, okay, I need to go and study. So I thought, LOL, I thought I was going to study abolition at Oxford. You all laugh at me right now. Laugh at me. So I go to Oxford thinking, I'm going to study abolition. Oh my God, we're going to make the world a better place. I got in there and they were like, LOL, who's this girl? We're trying to make the world worse, not better. What are you doing here? So basically, while I'm at Oxford, realizing that, oh shit, I totally came to the wrong place. Like, maybe I should have did this master's at SOAS. I met Kelsey. And she saved me, and she was like, no, I want to build something too, the Star Trek world. And I was like, what? And then that connection is what introduced me to the whole world of Cradle and to all the incredible people we met with in the book, from food organizers in Bristol to, you know, environmentalists from Manchester, you know, just people all over the country who are doing this right now, who are not waiting until Jeremy, I always have to make sure I say the H one, Hunt. When our chancellor is cutting, when he's cutting austerity and, you know, we don't have the funding, there are people right now who are doing it, who are, you know, making the food banks and doing the mutual aid. And so for me, getting involved with abolition was a tangible, I needed to see people who are making it better. Because all of the evidence and all of the data and everything I was learning was just telling me, hey, humanity's going down the tube. And then I was meeting people in real life, abolitionists in every walk of life, who were saying, no, we can build something different. That Star Trek world, like, it is attainable. And so for me, I came to abolition through rage, through white supremacy, but ultimately through joy. And I have to be an abolitionist, because if I wasn't, I would be a sad boy. Yeah. So we also are curious about hearing a bit about you all's book and like how you came to abolition in your text.
Okay, thank you. So we'll read a little bit from Against Borders, and then we'll talk maybe about what we wanted the book to do, maybe intersperse with how we got to where we got to, if we feel like it. Okay, so this is from the introduction. Borders are obsolete. This book proceeds from a simple point of departure. Things do not have to be this way. Immigration controls do not prevent human movement, nor do they protect citizens. In fact, borders produce many of the social harms they claim to prevent, including loss of life, inhuman and degrading treatment, and rampant inequality. Borders fail to address the conditions that shape migration processes in the first place: global inequalities, the dispossession of lands and livelihoods, climate breakdown, and they render people on the move vulnerable to various forms of exploitation and abuse. Immigration controls cannot be used to protect people's rights or to alleviate global inequality. They only ever worsen these problems. Echoing Angela Davis in her account of prisons, we contend that immigration controls are obsolete and should be abolished. Borders and prisons are both punitive systems for managing undesirable subjects, and both punish people through immobilization and forced exile. Whatever the important differences between prisons and borders, state violence is in both cases directed towards managing and restricting movement. The struggle for freedom is therefore, in both cases, a struggle over movement, a struggle for the right to locomotion, to move freely, over fences and out of cages. What we call border abolition is concerned with expanding this freedom, the freedom to move and to stay. This does not mean advocating for free movement in the world as it's currently configured, but rather for transformation of the conditions to which borders are a response. Abolition is concerned with presence, the presence of life-sustaining goods, services, and practices of care, as well as absence of violent state practices like detention and deportation. Accordingly, border abolition seeks to dismantle violent borders, but also to cultivate new ways of caring for one another, nurturing forms of collectivity more conducive to human flourishing than the nation-states we currently inhabit. Border abolition is a revolutionary politics situated within wider struggles for economic justice, racial equality, and sustainable ecologies, based on the conviction that there will be no livable futures in which borders between political communities are violently guarded. We do not provide a roadmap for how we get to border abolition. We do not know what that world will look like, and there is no single route to get us there. From prison abolition and the wider Black feminist politics that shape it, we take a longer-term view of political change. We hope to offer some suggestions and guiding questions, considering the steps we should take and hazards we should avoid. Border abolition offers practical frameworks for acting strategically now, but always focusing on the possibility and urgency of building a world without borders. The first step is to increase our collective understanding of what borders do in the world, and this book therefore offers an unflinching account of borders, discussing the connections between immigration control and other forms of state violence and surveillance.
3 broad themes guide our analysis in the chapters that follow. First, abolition requires that we are guided by dreams of a borderless future, our abolitionist visions. In the words of Berger, Kaber, and Stein, abolition is both a lodestar and a practical necessity. Across the chapters that follow, we attempt to show how the world could be otherwise through an attentiveness to critical openings in the present. Second, our abolitionist framework is concerned with identifying non-reformist reforms, changes in the here and now that can reduce the power and permanence of borders. Non-reformist reforms offer a way out of the binary opposition between reform and revolution, and help us identify specific reforms in the present that will reduce the power and reach of borders in the short and long term, while avoiding reforms that perpetuate the logic and legitimacy of immigration control. Finally, border abolition requires that we dismantle all the social structures underpinning the permanence of borders, which requires us to connect with wider struggles against connected forms of state violence, something radical activists tend to do much more effectively than those with professionalized roles in the migrant sector. Our invitation to get out of our silos so that people working on issues surrounding migration engage more effectively with feminists, anti-racists, prison abolitionists, people resisting counter-terror policies, and those working on issues surrounding tech and data, and of course vice versa, shapes the structure of the book and the arguments it pursues. Clearly, border abolition is easier said than done. The realization that the one thing we need to change is everything can certainly be overwhelming. How do we fight to close detention centers and end deportations, stop transnational corporations ruining lives and destroying the planet, while at the same time nurturing spaces of sanctuary and safety in our neighborhoods? How can we reduce the purview of surveillance, big data, and algorithms, while at the same time developing new forms of intimacy beyond the family, all at a time when disaster nationalism seems to be extending its hold over popular political imaginaries. Though the road is long, we should recognize the hopeful signs around us, developments already in motion, and think about the strategies that can build on this work. We need to keep imagining and building, even as despair shadows hope. We'll stop there.
So I guess, yeah, we wanted to say a bit about what we wanted this book to do, why we decided to write this book together. And I guess we really wanted to do something constructive. So, I mean, Luke and I come from quite different, like, professional contexts, generally. And I guess, for me, I had been working in professionalized NGOs for a long time, done a lot of civil liberties work in particular, and it felt like the state would just throw something new and then everyone would be like, oh my God, this is terrible, we have to stop it. And we would just get stuck in the status quo is better than whatever it is that they're proposing, and that's where you just stay and tread water. And at the same time, I was in an institutional context that was pretty liberal in the classic sense of the word. So I was kind of having all of these arguments around, like, why are child prisons okay, actually? Why do we just want a time limit on immigration detention? Why don't we want to end it? Are we a critical friend to the police? I'm not. Why are we? So I was having all of these professional conversations and also just generally being told, you can't say that, you can't do that, don't do that, you'll embarrass us. And so for me, personally, the book was just a bit of a revolt at, that kind of stultifying atmosphere, which of course was getting inside of work, but you're also kind of getting disciplined by the media and the Labour Party, etc., just being like, don't say that, that won't poll well, that's not possible, that's pie in the sky. So we really wanted to do something constructive that would help us just envision something that wasn't a tiny bit better than the status quo, but that also would help us get out of firefighting, something that would help us strategize towards that vision, but recognizing that actually we were in not a great place. I suppose the other thing to say is that we started writing this in what some people would call, the flowering of the movement for Corbyn's leadership, etc. So there was kind of, for us, a strategic point of intervention despite that nominally, on some accounts, being one of the most progressive Labour leaderships in decades, it was still an arms race for more police, right? It was, okay, maybe we can be less horrible to refugees, but we've got nothing on how materially we'll end the hostile environment. So there was something, we're not going to say which regressive citizenship laws we would repeal. There was no, policy substance to a lot of that platform. So I think in a kind of, maybe I think you were a bit less cynical about it than I was, but in a good faith way, wanted to be like, well, if you were really going to deliver on some of the things that you're saying, actually, this is how you would do it. So that's some of the places that the book came from for us. I guess you can say more about that.
Yeah, I mean, Gracie and I were friends already, but we were kind of in the wake of the Windrush scandal. So I'd been researching deportation to Jamaica before Brexit and before the Windrush scandal, and then suddenly deportation to Jamaica in particular became something people knew about, and there were charter flights and campaigns around that. So around that time, I guess Gracie and I would find ourselves on panels, at events, speaking to groups and different things, and kind of agreeing with, well, Gracie's hard not to agree with, but agreeing with each other and having a kind of connection around some of the work we were doing in the different contexts we were in. And I suppose that work for me, one of the things I kept saying around the time of the Windrush scandal was that the problem here is not simply that the wrong people have been treated like illegal immigrants. It's not that these people who are really citizens, who we can prove because of the arbitrary year of 1971, should be in the citizen box, have been treated like they should have been in the illegal immigrant box. And the whole point of a no borders politics, which is in some ways where I started rather than with abolition, as a frame, as a kind of analytic frame, was that you want to explode those categories altogether because, and I remember David Lammy writing this Guardian piece, which I always quote because he was writing about the Windrush scandal. He really found his voice at that moment. Yeah, I won't say any more about him personally. But
He actually once called me a great political friend.
wow,
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Before he got on
He had
the
no
front
idea
bench.
that I'd written this book, so
Yeah.
that's why.
Yeah. And in that article, he has the word citizen. It's a comment piece in The Guardian, so they're about 800 words, and it has the word citizen 13 times and illegal immigrant another 10. And his point is that these were citizens and they were being treated as illegal migrants. The whole point is, from me meeting people in Jamaica who'd been deported, they were never citizens. They weren't old enough to have arrived before 1971. They came in the early noughties before you needed a visa, overstayed, were criminalized, got deported. And they were the illegal immigrants that were the contrast to, and they might have been the grandchildren or the great-nephews or the neighbours of the people who were in the Windrush generation. So unsettling that clear distinction, which is what a reformist politics does, put people in the right boxes, maybe expand who counts as a victim of modern slavery or expand who counts as a refugee. It's overall unimaginative, and it's moving the goalposts is one thing, but it plays into the kind of the same game that the policymakers, the Home Office, etc., feel comfortable playing. So we found ourselves talking a lot about the need to get out of our silos, as we said, about the fact that there's a problem of trying to find the deserving migrants, of trying to find the innocent migrants or the ones who suffer in particular ways that are legible. And that actually it might be more useful, and this is really bounces off what Kelsey and Chelsea have been talking about, to think about those who are complicated and who we don't claim innocence for necessarily, but that are people who are made into illegal immigrants or criminals through a set of systems which start way before they end up on a plane, on a deportation flight, or in a detention center. And that thinking from the perspective of those kinds of people, and precisely the ones who are bad migrants, is a more useful way to think about raising the kind of the ground of rights for all of us. So in a way, that's where the real synergy is with prison abolition, and why it became such a useful frame for us, is me having worked with criminalized migrants and Gracie having banged her head against the wall trying to talk to people about more radical thinking about who we might be fighting for when we're making policy changes. Maybe I can ask you briefly, just because we started out with the book as the distinction between it being a kind of no borders text and it being an abolitionist book developed over time in our conversations, and you were the one who had found abolition especially generative for you, and I at first was still imagining this as whether we need to draw a hard line or not is unimportant, but as a kind of book that makes the case for no borders. So maybe you can say a bit about.
Yeah, and I think it speaks maybe to, the fact that we've come from different places to end up writing this book together, because I suppose one thing is that you've studied migration like as a field, right? Which I never did. I kind of studied philosophy and stuff and then pure human rights. And so I was never familiar with the kind of academic literature and theory on abolition and the way kind of no borders showed up in the work of amazing people like Bridget Anderson, for example, who was your supervisor, right? So there was that bit of it. I think also I had experiences working with the kind of more like the kind of white anarchist London no borders people, and some of that was great and some of it really wasn't, and I think that there was just something missing. And I had quite an interesting, I just remember this one interaction with someone from one of those collectives where they were kind of just saying it's actually just fine to be anti-everything. And I think I just got to a point where I was like, maybe it's fine, but I don't want, actually, like you, I don't want to be anti-everything, because that really just centers the thing that you don't want. I'm sort of like, what else is there? That's what I'm actually interested in. So I think there was something for me in that abolition just set that out really clearly, right? That it's presence as well as absence. And I think that for me, there was also something that's been lacking in some of those interactions with the kind of whiter anarchist groups, et cetera, was, and actually in my professional work, was just this idea that like the work was out there and you could treat each other kind of how you wanted. Whereas for me, the abolitionist frame is very much about we transform our relationships with one another, and that's how we transform the world. Like, you can't actually be being really crappy to so-and-so or not have a way to deal with harm within your collective while also being like, yeah, but we're going to abolish borders. So I think that for me was why abolition was the frame that I wanted to sit in. Yeah.
Can I? Yeah. Can we clap for you guys?
Go ahead.
That's so good. Yeah, I think we could probably. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, while you all are thinking of your question, I do have a question for you all because, and as a political scientist, I'm really curious about the nation state. So, from what I understand, the nation state came from war. It came from the Treaty of Westphalia. It came from Europe warring with each other about land and movement and power and control. So if there's a alternative, what do you dream about? Okay, the nation state is gone. What do you dream about? What are the types of organizations? Is it communities? Is it Bantustans? Is it everybody's in a village? Like, how do you dream about the post-nation state world?
Do you want to talk a bit about history of nation
No,
state?
I wanted to talk about the dreaming as well. I was actually worried that I was going to have to answer how this modern nation state
No, you
came
don't
to
have
be.
to do the history part. That's
You
fine.
can.
I want to
Yeah,
hear
you
the
can.
dream part.
Start with your dream
The
then.
dream part is
Start
what we
with your
want.
dream.
I'll start with my dream.
Start with your dream.
And again, I guess we can call it a dream and also call it about that kind of thing that towards the end of the passage we read is about being attentive to the critical openings in the present. And I suppose it's also, if we want to affirm something and not just be against something, what do we see as a, hopeful, which is not about optimism, but about a critical opening in the present, a possibility that's already there, but you want to turn into more of the major key. And the two obvious answers for me about the nation are below and above. And so beneath the nation state, there are places, maybe we're in one right now, and they're not only in London, they're elsewhere, where the hold of the national imaginary and where we're all supposed to scan from the white cliffs of Dover to look for the boats with the dark people coming over, that's not the imaginary that has a hold of a lot of people who I meet all around me. So in one way, there's forms of identification that aren't abstracted to the idea of nation as a kind of eternal formation through which I find meaning in the world, which is just a bigger version of my family, etc. But something like the places I love that are more local to me. So that's not a kind of, it doesn't romanticize the local necessarily, but it sees something more concrete about the way some people might identify with the city or their neighborhood or their area or particular places they like to go. So something really local. But I wouldn't only want to replace a national imaginary with something just local, because there's also the necessity of the crises we're in require kind of global internationalist forms of seeing and recognizing one another's plight. So the answer isn't to go and just set up your own little thing in the countryside and then you're good. It obviously has to be about learning as much as you can about other people really far away from you who might be really different to you. And that those two things have to happen in tension, and they sort of did happen with the movement for Black Lives, with NSARS, with other things. Climate movement requires it, and whether that's happening successfully is another question, but it requires those forms of kind of planetary consciousness. I hope that doesn't extract all the answers by just saying beneath and above. You can say more.
Well, beneath it. But I suppose, so there's something around the fact that we're not sure what it would look like. There's a sketch right at the end of the book. One of the interludes is what a borderless world might look like. And it's interesting because one of the things our editor, Rosie at Verso, who's really, really brilliant, and we love her, and she kind of said right at the start of the process, please in here, can you say something about what a borderless world will be like, what you envision? And it's sort of something that we then kind of put to one side and wrote all the rest of the book, knowing that we were just going to have to attend to this quite major thing at some stage. And I was procrastinating about another part of the book. I think probably the counter-terror bit. I did quite a bit of procrastination. But one day I sat down and I was like, I'm going to write a sketch of a borderless world. And that's where the fiction bit of the book came from. I set an alarm for like half an hour, and that's what came out. And maybe I'll read some later on. But it felt a lot easier to work with fiction in doing that dreaming than it did to work with political science. So there's that element of it. And I suppose you've gone straight to, when we were talking beforehand, before you two got here, I was saying, I really want to talk about, what abolitionists think about the state, because that's kind of the heart of where a lot of abolitionist debate is at the minute. What do we think about the state? So I think that is what your question is getting at. And I guess I listened to this really interesting conversation between Dean Spade and some other people about what abolitionists think about the state. And, one of their central arguments is just like the state isn't doing what we need it to do for us anyway, so we can dispense with it. But then I was talking to Ruthie Gilmore about it for this other project. And I guess I'm sort of just like, what do we do about things like phasing out fossil fuels? What do we do with like rare diseases? So there's something about the level of expertise and investment and cooperation that's required that I think, as Luke said, means that we can't just go local. Even stuff like sewage, it's like everybody gonna learn how to do their own sewage. I mean, they could, okay, we could, right? But I don't really want to do that. So, so I'm whatever it is won't be the state that we know, but we do need some way to cooperate and be in connection with distant others. That's kind of the heart of where I've got to. Yeah. I don't know what you guys think about that question.
Yeah, I think there's so much there. Maybe just one point to the last point that you said about abolitionists think really different. So you named two famous abolitionists, Dean Spade and Ruthie Wilson Gilmore. Their political, what I want to say is they're abolitionists of every political and economic ideology that exists. So there are abolitionists who are anarchists, who are literally like, nah, everything gotta go. Me and my shotgun, we gonna be over here growing our food on the homestead, and the rest of y'all be easy. And then there are people who are full-on communists who feel that no, we should rearrange, the state in a way that it provides all of our needs, and the state should control resources. And this is why I love abolition, because it's not an ideology, it's a belief. It's a strategic, like it's something we're working towards. So what I mean is there's room, it's a wide tent. There's room under the tent for the person who wants to have their own homestead, but also the person who thinks the state should be providing health care and should be doing these types of things. And then people like me are like somewhere in the middle, because even in Star Trek, so to your point about it's a lot easier to find examples in fiction. Whenever people to me are like, you're living in an imaginary dream world, I'm like, Star Trek, bro. Like, Star Trek was woke 50 years ago. Like, honestly. And even in the Star Trek world, the Galactic Federation be tripping. So, like the state is not an end-all be-all is what I'm saying. And I think it's a wide tent and people have a lot of different ideas, and you don't have to have a clear answer for what the political and economic system should ultimately look like to know that what we have right now ain't it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Just to repeat the question, we have an incredible retired attorney who worked with refugees, who asked about our opinions around the role of the state, with the example of moving from a potential Corbyn leadership into what we got going on right now. So the question is, what are our thoughts about the state, and is engaging with the state completely futile?
Can I say anything?
I mean, the short answer is lots of different people need to do lots of different kinds of things. So no, it's not futile. And I mean, maybe the other three can think about more practically on the state, but I suppose my experience has been working with immigration lawyers. And while the ones I know who are good and who often feel also like their profession blinkers them because they don't get to think long-term strategically, when there's a charter flight to Jamaica, I'm calling the good lawyers. I'm there's other people who have more connections with people who do very brave things like trying to stop the coaches leaving Brookhouse, etc., and that's important too. But for me, my experience of having worked individually with people who end up on their flights and their families, I know that the most important thing in that moment is to try and get someone off a flight. And in the same way that stopping the flights to Rwanda is a massively important thing to do. So it's not, and if Labour under Keir Starmer was to have a policy of stopping the Rwanda flights, even if they can't say anything humane at all and can only say something terrible, then that would be a good thing to win. But it wouldn't be enough. But it's still important that those people do that. And lawyers are an example of a group who have a specific set of skills that we need as part of the broader struggle. It's not that we think that. I mean, maybe it would be great if everyone could stop the coaches leaving Brookhouse, but that's also risky in its other ways. And we know from people who've done things like that the sacrifice is huge.
They need lawyers too.
Yeah,
Come
they
on.
need lawyers too.
Like, that's the thing is I think, unfortunately, a lot of the... Oh, sorry, were you done?
No, yeah, go.
I think those professions are limited and they are like currently necessary. Like we do need more abolitionist lawyers because the state is clamping down on resistance like more so than ever now. And I think we definitely like you said, we just need people like on all levels. We need a lot more people who are taking direct action. We also need people who are training to become lawyers and practicing law in ways that is for liberation and is not replicating these same issues, right, of like only defending people kind of based on innocence and really trying to bring these things to like with a more political and abolitionist lens. I guess I want to take that opportunity as well to talk about like kind of just engaging with the state in general. I'm not going to talk about the Labour Party. It's just not my thing. For like electoral politics, but I think in terms of like I know there's just lots of people who whose jobs are increasingly embedded in like systems of policing and surveillance, and that includes teachers, that includes social workers, that is people working in housing, in social care, in healthcare, all of these spaces. And I think all of those are sites, and that's really what Brick by Brick is about. All of those are sites of resistance where we can, as individuals, resist the impacts of policing and the violence of the state. And I think often we feel powerless, or we feel a bit like, oh, these are huge structures that we need to change. But if your safeguarding policies tell you that you need to call the cops, and you do that as the first response, and you're not thinking about all the other ways that you could support a young person or a vulnerable person in your life before you bring in that like very escalating measure, then I think you need to think a bit more about it. And I know people who work in hostels, who are working in the social sector, who are doing that work, and it would be so much easier if they had that solidarity to know that other people in other spaces are constantly doing that work to defend our communities again from policing. And I think I don't know, I haven't articulated that very well, but essentially I think there's so many sites that we can resist, and increasingly the state is turning us into cops, is turning us into people where it's like care looks like policing, right? It's about escalating it to someone else instead of actually being like, actually, what can I do to support this person, and what can we do to build networks so that this doesn't happen again, rather than being like, okay, you've done something bad, where can we put you? So I think that's kind of one of the main things that I wanted to mention.
Any more questions? So that question was from someone who works in policy, asking what happens when our language is co-opted by the state, specifically thinking about the word community and the way the word community is deployed by the state, often as a way to offload things that maybe should be provided by the state or to justify austerity, when we're actually talking about substantively something very different.
I smile not because of co-optation, but because this question is so important. I wish that somebody had told me as a young activist to expect co-optation, because every time I was shocked by it. Every time I was shocked. What do you mean the World Economic Forum is saying capitalism is the problem? Duh! Like, you know, you would be shocked by it. You're like, BP is saying they're going net zero? How? You can't, it's impossible for you to be net zero. Like, you can't even, right? And that shock, we've got to get over that. We have to expect co-optation. We have to expect our language to be, because it's useful. It works. It works. It's successful. But the other thing is, who's actually opposed to human rights? It's really difficult to say, nah, we don't like human rights. No, we want our planet to blow up. Like, no, we don't need water without microplastics in it. Like, that's really hard to say. It's really hard to say, no, human beings do have different values depending on what color they came out. It's hard to say that straight up. So, of course, your language is going to be co-opted because it's wonderful. So that's the first thing. You have to expect co-optation. Stop being shocked by it. But the second thing is that you have to know what your freedom feels like instead of what it sounds like. If you know what your freedom feels like, perfect example, girl boss feminism, right? I know what the freedom of women and femmes and my trans sisters feels like, and it doesn't feel like you being in a boardroom with a pink suit on. That doesn't feel like my trans sister.
I've got a pink suit on.
Right. But that don't feel like me getting free. I like your suit. It's nice. But it's nothing about your suit that gets me free. So the next time you see an all-women business saying, oh, feminism and girl boss, you like, where my trans sisters at? Where my refugee sisters at? Where my Palestinian sisters at? Where my gender non-conforming sisters at? Where my black sisters at? They're not there. So y'all not doing feminism. You're saying the word, but it doesn't feel like my freedom. So we have to switch from, oh my gosh, they said net zero. Oh my God, they said feminism. Oh my God, they said allyship. They said racial justice. They said, but what did they do? That's where we have to switch our focus. And we switch your focus there. It's so easy. To greenwash, it's like, boom. It's like, all right, what Rio Tinto is saying their commitment to ESG. What does Rio Tinto do? Oh, mining. All right, cool. Like, I can strike. So it's like we have to take that next step to say, okay, you're saying the right thing. MP from Green, Labor, whatever party they're from. Oh my gosh, you're saying the right thing. Let's go look at the last 3 votes. How did you vote on the crime courts and sentencing bill? Oh, you voted for it. Okay. How did you vote on Rwanda? Oh, you voted for that too. Oh, okay. And you love Suella Braverman. All right. So that's telling me that even though your tweets say human rights and you're standing up for, your actions show me that you're not. And I think that's the scorecard that we need to have. We need to start having a better scorecard instead of just taking the words that we hear.
I think that's so important to like be aware of how, you know, our enemies like co-opt that language, right? But there's sort of like these less obvious ways that it's co-opted as well by sort of reformist organizations and, you know, even the NHS talks about transformation all the time and things, right? Yeah. And I think that we really need to look at, like you said, it's getting to the root of like what is actually behind this, and we have some like quite large like reformist prison charities and things who are now using this language, right? But I'm not sure that if, you know, but I think that I guess just really like trying to look at what those abolitionist steps are and like those non-reformist reforms, but really those steps towards abolition are, and are we holding ourselves to them? Because it's really easy to be the people who get into the room if you're not actually going to like challenge anything, right? And there are people who are like in the room and are insisting that they are our allies, but frequently kind of just compromising on a level that like isn't working. And I think that's what we've seen with the policing bill. That's what we've seen with a lot of campaigns around migrants' rights, right? That like, you know, the Labour Party pushing for like a limit on detention and these kinds of things. It's like, I know that sometimes we can think of some of those things as steps, but just doing research on how racist a thing is can just be used to make that thing a little bit less racist, but not actually get rid of that law, right? Not actually get, something like joint enterprise, something like, prevent, like any of these things, like just doing that research in itself, the abolitionist step, and it's like we really need to be holding each other accountable within our movement to be pushing and pushing and pushing all the time, and not just allowing ourselves to be co-opted even. We've seen that with the Holloway campaign as well, where like we really fell for it. It really felt like on this document that the council put out, like, okay, they're gonna give us a women's center, and it's gonna be a room at the bottom of a block, do you know what I mean? Because when we say building, they hear room, and they can still put that language on it and call it the women's building. And so like we have to be like just so vigilant about it, because it's even when people are saying yes, 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 we're on your side, that's actually some of the most dangerous and most toxic kind of co-option that happens.
I guess just to come back to the part of your, you mentioned being in policy spaces, right? Which is where I've spent quite a lot of time. And I think there's an issue as well just in the ecosystem, in the dominance of kind of policy and legal workers being the ones that are kind of in the room and formulating the demands that get heard, right? Because in policy spaces, you measure success very differently. Yeah. So very often you're like, yes, we managed to get so-and-so to make a commitment to do X. And generally, policy is a discipline. You're sort of just running after the government in that they set the agenda and you try and influence the thing that they say they're doing. So it would be one thing to be like, we have a strategy that starts with get a rhetorical commitment to X, and we figured out how we're going to work that into substantively Y. But actually, most of the time, you're just like, they said X, we can take that as a win. Our funders will recognize that as a win, and now we're on to the next thing. Yeah. So I think there's something about actually the dominance of policy as a discipline, which is also why it's so important for people that aren't in those spaces to make the time to do the dreaming and articulation of what we actually want, because that's the thing that we do in policy, right? I could come up with demands all the livelong day for an organization. And so you'll be right there on the front foot. Anytime something new happens, you'll be like, we'll do X, Y, Z. Let's have a review to this. And a review, an inquiry, all these process things that you know will be wins because the government's really happy to commit to process things. Policy people are always on the front foot with all of those. So it's about actually the rest of us being really disciplined in saying, even though we're firefighting and even though formulating demands is not like the main thing that we do, we're going to spend some time articulating and really pinning down what it is we really want, because then that's what we're going to go in and demand, and they're not going to be able to wriggle out of it. So I think that's important too.
Sorry, just one small point to the lawyer. I just have to say this as a political scientist. I cannot advise you to not speak to elected officials who are making decisions and using your money under the myth that they have your approval for what they're doing. Two-party system aside, they're doing it in your name. They bombing the babies in Syria in your name. In your name. They locking up 17-year-olds with dyslexia who are coming straight out of care homes. They locking them up in your name. So when you speak to your local council and you ask them, how are you using my money? You giving more to the police officers? I have a problem with that. We haven't had a youth, the youth centers in our neighborhood have been closed. All of them. I live in Oxford. All 12 youth centers have been closed during the past 12 years of Tory leadership. So if we don't speak up about those things, if we don't, send in things during PMQs, if we don't call to the MP's office, if we don't show up to the city council meeting, the people who show up will be the 5 Tory voters who agree with everything that the government is doing. And that will be who will be there to speak for the people. So as much as there are so many of us who won't engage, I think there needs to be many of us who do engage, because the government is making all these decisions in your name and with your money. And it's up to you to tell them that you don't want them to do that.
There was a hand.
There was a hand back
there. There was a hand. But there might be another. So what would our message be to the professionalised migration sector, especially in the context of the new migration bill? What non-reformist reforms would we urge people to consider? Yeah, I know, but I, in part, wrote the book because I was just really tired of the sector. People do amazing work, but it's not, I was tired. So I kind of don't have any more messages for the sector. I wrote a blog, I work in climate. I moved to Scotland and I work in climate. I'm out. But I just wrote a little blog that Verso put out on the new bill that was kind of for the movement. And if people from the sector want to read that, they might find it helpful. There's also just a whole bit in the book that's about we don't think we can prescribe what definitively is or isn't a non-reformist reform, but there are some questions in the book modeled on questions that the US prison abolitionist group Critical Resistance asked way back in the 70s. We kind of have adapted some of those questions so people can work things through if they'd like to. So I would recommend that people read the Abolition chapter of the book. I guess, what do we talk about? I mean, I guess they're less germane to the bill. I think to go back to actually what we were just talking about, right? Safe and legal is a thing that's been completely co-opted. The and legal should never have been in there. So stop saying and legal, just say safe. When it comes to routes for people to come to the UK. But also, like, I'm someone who has been in that sector for a long time, and people, I know that a lot of the like research, a lot of the message testing basically is saying, talk about principles and stuff like that. So people keep saying fair and effective immigration system. What does that mean, right? People keep saying it, and I think actually, so I think people need to figure out what they mean by that. There are some groups that would just like a nicer immigration system, and there are some groups that are sort of chip it away until it doesn't exist anymore, which I think is part of why the sector doesn't work that well together, because people don't actually want the same things. At this point, my prescription for the sector is sort of like, two big groups deal with this bill because the parliament is what it is. Two big groups like deal with briefing. Everybody else, could you please get together and put your heads down and figure out what you actually want, and then like articulate that and figure out how to build towards it, because there's just going to be a new immigration bill every year. That's been like my whole career. There's always a new one. It always goes through. We take some of the edges off. Don't be led by this bill. Like, be led by the world that we need to live in. That's what I would say.
Just a really quick thing. I want you guys to call out fascism. That's what I want you to do. Professionals, migrants, NGOs working in the charity, you are in a position where you're director of this, director of programs, whatever. You're in a position where people want to listen to you. Call it out. It's fascism. It's fucking fascist. Sorry to F-bomb. I hope the children are gone. But seriously, it's fascism. This is not like, it's not a drill at this point. It's kind of how I feel. And I'm tired of the flowery, the oh, Suella shouldn't smile at the detention center. Like, call it what it is. Call it fascism. Call it out. And speak about Gary Lineker. Speak about Lineker Gate and that whole thing that just happened. Because the other thing that bothers me is that whole thing just happened, and we have a whole migration, whole charity sector in this country. Y'all not saying the same shit that Gary Lineker was saying. And he's a footballer. So what's up? That's my question. If this is your industry, if this is what you know, why are you not calling it out? Why are you not speaking up and saying the truth and calling your MP every day and saying, I am the director of programs at this place and I am deeply concerned with this. Use your clout, use your position as a position of power and influence, and not just looking to activists to put themselves on the line. Put yourself on the line in your professional capacity and name it, because that's what Gary did. Also, shout out to Gary. I like that guy.
Yeah, me too.
He's from Leicester.
Absolutely. I think, like, the labour movement is a really key site for us to really start to think more deeply about what the world is that we want to be building, right? What does it mean to build a world that is accessible, that is focusing on disability justice, I think the workers' rights movement is like a. Whose alarm is that? It's a.
Wake up, girl.
That was really jarring. One of the things that we think about as well is just like, just in terms of that implicit consent, right? It's like we're all consenting implicitly by going along with what the law is, right? And so if we actually could have a general strike, if we could actually get enough people on board that we could actually all not pay for transport for a week, and actually the workers were on board with that and just opening the barriers and letting us through and these kinds of things. And we supported each other to do that. We created the mutual aid network so that we could feed each other while people are striking. What we could do, we could actually just build a huge network to support people to take the action that we really need. I kind of think at the moment, the formal union model is limited, right? I think we need to go beyond that to really look to the global women's strike history, to look at the
Garment workers.
Exactly, garment workers, the history of just of migrant workers, of really looking to what does it mean to. I kind of felt like there was such a moment in the pandemic, right, where we didn't quite get there, the conversation didn't quite get there, but there was a real moment to be actually, what does it look to change, to make so much more work accessible, to change the structures of how much time we spend away from our families and what school means and all of these things. I think if school is also is the way that it is because of the need for childcare, right? And because of the way that the working week works and things. And so all of these things, if we were to shift them, that would be a necessary part of abolition, I think. And also on a basic level, it's us that's building the prisons. It's us that are becoming police. It's us that are policing the borders and all these things. It's the people, right? And so we can not do those things. Maybe we talked about people who work in the charity sector or whatever, but it's frequent and even more increasingly, it's marginalized groups that are being targeted to police our own people, right? It's becoming border guards and becoming police. And there's these recruitment drives in schools, majority black schools, to make people become police. And it's really this insidious thing to kind of turn us on each other and create more of these issues and more of this violence. And so I think, it's a really key site for us, and it's not my expertise, which is why I'm floundering a little bit, but I feel very passionately about it.
We've got time for one final question.
Did anyone else want to say anything on that?
No, well,
Take another question. I might say something back on that. I don't think you floundered at all. I think it's great.
you swam.
In the beginning, you mentioned the role of communication for abolition. Can you expand on that?
Communication.
Communication, you said you had workshops or presentations.
Yeah. Okay, so I think, that's a really great question.
Great
It kind of brings us back to transformative justice, I think, and what we're building. And for us, so much of what we're learning about how to deal with things like conflict and harm in our communities is through actually taking the time to learn about each other, to build trust and to build just to build better communication between ourselves. And that's not just about learning the right language, right? There's not just this nonviolent communication stuff of if we all learn to be perfectly calm and say things in exactly the right way.
Use I statements.
Exactly. We'll set rules and then we'll all be fine. No, but it's about actually giving ourselves space to understand each other. And that's not going to always be by being perfect, but it's by spending time, and that's why also, we need to be working less, because we need to spend time actually, working together to build these strong relationships. I think one of the things that I've really learned about relational work is that we also need to put, a much longer, timeline on it. We expect things to just transform within a week, or we have one conversation with someone and then they've changed their minds, or now they they're not sexist anymore or whatever. And that's really not how it's going to work, right? If we're talking about trying to dismantle things that are so embedded in us and in our culture, we're talking about shifting the whole culture around ourselves. We're also talking about really like disrupting patterns that might be really, really deep-seated, and learning to do that over a really long period of time. And honestly, like, so much of the conflict work that we do is just like planning like how to have what chats when and with whom. And like, I feel like I just literally this weekend was doing like a big conflict workshop, and one of the things we came up with was a communication map, because it's like so much of the time when we're just trying to think about how am I going to like support these people who are going through this thing, and it's just like planning out like, well, I'm going to need to talk to this person to figure out how they're feeling about this. I'm going to need to talk to this person to figure out how they're feeling about this. And then at some point they're going to need to talk to each other. How do we facilitate that? Like, it's just really like doing that and giving enough space and time for people to process their feelings, to talk to someone else, to like do all of that. Yeah, I think it's complicated, but when we do it, it feels really good, and it feels like actually that's when we start to feel things shift. And if we can give each other enough time and space and learn to like let feelings like sit and breathe for a little while before just acting all the time, we can really start to see a shift in the ways that we relate to each other.
And I wanted to lob to a point that you made earlier, Gracie, when you talked about your experiences in some so-called like leftist spaces or progressive spaces. When we were writing the book, we came to this realization that all of us have the ability to perpetuate harm, meaning that I can hurt you really badly. I could traumatize you. I could mess you up. I could be violent towards you. I could really rock you, regardless of my identities and that I'm 5'2" and really cute and American and, you know, I'm so sweet and I'm a leftist and I'm a feminist. But I could still do some stuff that would be really harmful to you. So when we disrupt that idea that there are good people, there are bad people, there are rapists, and then there are good guys, it's like, nah, it's people who respect consent and it's people who don't. That's a choice. No matter what your politics is, you could not have respected consent. Guess what, right? So when we understood any of us can harm each other, then it becomes a much more bigger responsibility. Now we can't just label, oh, the Tories over there are such shitty people. Okay, but how you talk to your friends? Do you gaslight? Do you respect? Do you accept when someone calls you out on your shit? Are you defensive? Are you deflecting? Are you getting angry? Do you raise your voice and scream? Do you slam doors? That's violence. Come on. In a lot of leftist spaces, we've seen a lot of those toxic behaviors, and they don't get called out because, oh, no, we're all allies. No. The behavior, again, does it feel like freedom? Does it feel like love? Does it feel like respect? That was, to me, the big thing for abolition. Becoming an abolition made me be different. My partner will overhear us doing conflict workshops, and then me and him will have a disagreement. He's like, Chelsea, impact over intent. He be quoting to me the things like, you're harming me right now. You don't, he will tell me, you don't have to agree with my feelings for them to be valid. I'm like, who are you? But it's that thing of me being an abolitionist means when I go home to my partner, I have to be different. It's not just about what I say to you guys when I'm up here and da-da-da. No, it's when I go home, I have to be different. It's when Kelsey calls me out on something and I can't people please her and I have to sit and let her be mad at me because I messed up. And I don't get to go, but we both woke. Like, come be my friend again. Like, no, I have to respect her boundaries. Like, and this is real stuff that we've gone through where it's like, that's hard. And that's the work of being a human being that is required for us to not lock each other up. We have to do the hard work, and we have to change and become actually better people. Sorry to break it to all the progressives in the audience. We have to be better people than them. We do. We actually
And
do.
it's a commitment to getting through things. Like, it's really hard, but if you're not going to treat people as disposable, and like that doesn't mean you have to be best friends with someone who caused you serious harm, right? But it does mean that, like, with like small bits of conflict and like things where people piss you off or whatever, maybe trying to be a little bit more open to getting through that, because we want to continue the work together. We want to continue to be in community with each other, and we want to embody Dr. King's idea of beloved community. It's not just about loving the people who are easy. And I think that, I guess an example of having been in a mediation recently, as someone who was in a conflict, and it was like, oh, like there is only so much that the mediator does, right? There's only so much that the facilitator does in that situation, because it's about how I show up. Like if I'm showing up being like, I'm not going to listen to you, and I'm not going to change my mind about this, and you are wrong and I've done nothing wrong at all, we're not going to move. Nothing's going to happen in that conversation, even if some of it is true. Maybe they did do something that pissed me off, but also what did I do in reaction to that, and how am I treating this person? What was the context of how this came about, and what do I want this relationship to be? And it was a good reminder that actually I had to come in and be open. I had to come in and be like, what is this person bringing, and how do I want to move forward with this situation? Because yeah, with transformative justice and with community accountability, like we're not holding people accountable. We're not forcing people to be accountable. We're not pushing them to do that. We have to be accountable ourselves. We have to be self-accountable. Otherwise we will just end up with someone having to police us, right? So if we're not going to act with the police, then we have to be self-accountable. We have to own our own choices and our behaviors. And so, yeah, that's not going to be perfect all the time, but it means that when we're not perfect, we have to commit to try and get through it. I think we've run over time, yeah?
Thank you guys.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
To purchase either of these books, please head to our website pagesofhackney.co.uk, where you can buy them for collection from the bookshop or for delivery nationwide. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe wherever you find your podcasts for more literary events like this one.